starting. There. What a disaster that would have been. There. Okay. Final exam review. Makes me pretty sad. Last day of class, so I'm always kind of like, you guys have been really fun, so. But I'm pretty tired today, so I don't know about you guys, but it has been a week. It's only Wednesday. I know. Don't remind me. All right, so our final exam, last time I checked, is on December 12th at 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock in B103? Pretty sure. Oh, good question.
What do you remember?
Uh,
I don't know what yet.
it's like you shouldn't be bringing anything for your birthday.
Yeah, what the heck?
I should be bringing stuff for your birthday. It's like I have to make a final too, you know. So no, no, that's really fun. Any allergies? Do you want me to write it down? Go on the record. No allergies in this room. All right. That could have made yeah. No shellfish, okay? Yeah. So December 12th, 6 to 9. It's a sucky time slot, but I can't do anything about it. So make sure you eat before, okay? My office hours, I usually do all day office hours, especially if I have a 6 to 9 exam. So I'll be here definitely all day, 9 to 5 on December 12th, okay? Jackson's been kind enough to book a room for a study session. So I don't know if you guys just want me to go there instead. It's a bigger room than my office. So, or if you want to have your study session alone time, I don't know. Can't really read the room right now. Everyone's too sleepy and it's too dark in here. Friday, lab 3 is due at midnight and the lab report is due at noon on Friday. Because I have to have them. I gotta have them because they have to be hard copies, right? Looks like this.
Do you have to hand in lab 3 as a hard copy as well?
No, lab 3 is just on Moodle. Just slip it under my door anytime before noon on. Okay, yeah. Yeah. So good. Yeah. So my office hours, I do all day on December 12th. All day is just 9 to 5. And then I have to kind of get ready for the final. So for the final at 6. Okay. But there's the study room. Study room booked for 3 to 5. And it is
E204.
E204. Hey, nice room. Okay. So, and then I'll also have office hours kind of after 2 on December 11th. Okay. My flight is supposed to get in at 12:30, so just kind of, I'll go straight here, but that's why I'm saying after 2, just to be safe. But you can always just text me, okay? So, or I am always available by text 250-864-8386, or email if you prefer, elee at, so many E's, okanagan.bc.ca. But I feel like you already know that. Okay. So, I'm available around on the afternoon of the 11th, all day on the 12th, right? Or just virtually all the time. Questions? So what is on this final, you ask? Okay. If you flip through the practice final, right, I've said it once, I'll say it again. This is not the length to expect, okay? I'm gonna go through the format. This is kind of a, well, it's practice for the final, I should call it. Because if you know how to do all of these and you know them inside out and you know how to do them, then you know how to do all the questions on the final, right? There are going to be some theory ones that aren't covered on here, obviously, but all the application ones, they're covered in here, right? And so it's long because I make you do a hypothesis test and a confidence interval, right? Makes it a little bit longer. On the final, it's only going to be one or the other. Okay. So, if there aren't any questions, let's talk final exam outline. Okay. First of all, there's going to be 6 true-false questions. Even if you don't know, 50-50 chance of getting it right. All right, so those are nice. And then we're going to have some multiple choice. That's what the outline's for. There's going to be 10 questions multiple choice from chapter 1. So that's going to be things like, basically like test 1, right? We had some multiple choice on there, right? So I give you some information about some data collected, and I ask you which is the response variable, which is the explanatory variable, right? Is this a categorical variable? Is this a numerical variable? Things like shape, center, and spread. 5 number summaries are tested in there. And so you've seen all those in multiple choice format on test 1. Okay. But because they're kind of like laying the groundwork for the rest of the course, there's quite a few in the multiple choice, but they're not really worth a long answer. Okay. So then there's going to be three little ones from chapter 2. Remember, chapter 2 is on probability. So just 3 little multiple choice questions testing. Do you know the concepts of from the probability section, right? Theory, and a little bit of applied. 10 questions from chapter 3. Chapter 3, that's the Z-score stuff, right? And so when did we do that? We did that on, I want to say test 1, right? Honestly can't remember right now. So I've just made a lot of those Z-score questions. So something follows a normal distribution with a mean this and a standard deviation this. What's the probability of being less than this, greater than this, right? And so you're just going to pick the right option in the multiple choice. Okay. It makes it a little bit faster, right? The multiple choice, because you don't have to show your work, you don't have to show your diagram or anything. You can just kind of do the calculation. Although at this point, you probably like to do the diagram. What do I know? Okay. So 10 questions from chapter 3 in the multiple choice. And then just kind of 2 quick checking in questions from chapter 5. Chapter 5 is t-tests, right? So 1 sample means, matched pairs, 2 sample means. So it's just testing the concepts from there. 3 from chapter 6. One of these is going to be a sample size calculation. So it includes a sample size calculation. And then there's going to be 6 from chapter 7. And that's just like the assignment you just handed in, right? So, but in multiple choice format, right? So if I, for example, if I give you the regression line, right? And then one of the questions might be, what's the slope, right? So you just look at it, pull out the slope, pick the right answer. What's the intercept? Great. Da, 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 da. Right. So just checking in for the regression. Right. So total 40 marks for these true false multiple choice questions. The remaining 60 marks, because I was pretty adamant about having 100 marks because it makes it so much easier. I don't know. Not that it matters, but it just makes it look nice. So for the long answer is 60 marks. Okay. The first one, thanks. First one is going to be a probability question. Chapter 2, probability. Oof. It's either going to be a two-way table or a tree diagram. And what you'll notice in the practice test that I give you both, right? So like I said, if you can handle the practice test, right, you've got all your bases covered. Okay? So it's either going to be a two-way table or a tree diagram. And then there's going to be, let's see here. I'll just do them in the order I have here. A 1 sample mean question. And what you'll notice is I'll just go through the list in order here. On the final, they're not in this order, right? So don't stick to that, right? I'm trying to get you to figure out what type of question it is. And for 1 mark on these hypothesis testing or confidence interval questions, you can tell me what type of question it is. I've even given it to you in a list, and you just circle the type. Okay? So first one sample mean, it's either going to be a confidence interval or a hypothesis test, right? So we've been calling them a formal hypothesis test, or we can test using a confidence interval, right? Either way, there's going to be some question that we have to answer, and then we can, I'll say, use a formal hypothesis test, right? Or use a confidence interval to test it. So, next, matched pairs. Again, it's either going to be a confidence interval or a hypothesis test. Not that it makes a difference, right? But 1 sample mean and matched pairs are essentially the same formulas, right? So one of them is going to be hypothesis testing, one of them is going to be confidence intervals. Right? Get some variety in there. Okay. Then we've got 2 sample means. When we want to compare the means of 2 independent groups, right? We've got 2 sample means. And again, it's going to be a confidence interval or a hypothesis test. And then we've got 1 sample proportions, or 1 sample proportion, confidence interval or a hypothesis test with assumptions. Okay, so you have to tell me those, you have to check those assumptions. Yeah. Yeah. And for example, if you're reading ahead and you see that, okay, this is going to be just, I ask you to test it with a hypothesis test, then you only check the assumptions for the hypothesis test, right? You don't have to check the confidence interval and hypothesis test for both of them, just the ones that apply. Okay. Oh, and yeah, I haven't finished marking your assignment 6, and I'm sorry, I'm just as bummed as you guys are. But I'll get them done with the assignment 7s, and then I'll send an announcement out. You can come pick them up. I forgot about them. As I was leaving last night, security kicks you out at 1. Did you guys know that? I glanced over, and there they were. They didn't get done. So, yeah. No problem. Moving on to 2 sample proportions. As promised, it'll just be a confidence interval. Although from what I've seen, of course, I tried to get them marked and then I had to give up. You guys did pretty good on the attempt for the hypothesis testing for 2 proportions, so I'm really impressed. So again, you have to check the assumptions, which is, they're just the same assumptions, right? But you have to check that the number of successes and the number of failures for each group is more than 10, right? So that one's for sure going to be a confidence interval. And last but not least, a regression question. Icon assignment 7. For 2 through 7, you're going to tell me the type for 1 mark each. Yeah. So for starting with the confidence interval hypothesis testing ones. And I threw in regression in there because that should be an easy mark. I've got some kind of easy marks in there.
Is your exam different from the like business stats?
We've got the same format. So, yeah. I mean, questions are different, but essentially the same. We work together on it, so. Basically the same. So, you're going to tell me the type for just 1 mark each, which is pretty good. And like I said, it'll just be a list. You don't have to tell me why or anything. Yeah, should be pretty good. So total marks. It's 100. A confidence interval question is worth 5 marks, whereas a hypothesis testing question is worth 7 marks. Okay. So a confidence interval is 5 marks, and a hypothesis testing question is 7 marks. And I didn't even tell you. There's going to be 3 hypothesis tests and 2 confidence intervals. So you can strategize on which those might be. Yeah. Any questions about that? No? Okay. So it turns out I didn't print nearly enough practice tests. I'll just say it would have lasted any other day throughout the term. But feeling popular today. So like I said, if you just kind of hang out after class, I'll run upstairs and make more copies if you want to print a copy and you don't have one. Okay. But what I want to do is I just want to kind of have you read through the practice tests, the practice final, and then you think about what type each of these questions are, and then we'll go through them just briefly, just to make sure that you're on the right page, right? So, so you have the right idea. Okay. So if you don't have one, share with the person next to you. If the person next to you doesn't have one, you sat in the wrong spot. Is there a cluster that doesn't have one? All right. Any other cluster that doesn't have one? I've got my one that I'm gonna photocopy. Do you have one to look at? Good. That's good. I'll get you one after class. Okay. All right. So let's read through these. So, or you can read through them on your own. What's the point in me telling you what they are right away? I have to stop myself. So what are we thinking here? First decision we're going to make, right, is if this is a means question or a proportions question. Nice. Right, because we've got, nice. It is. Nice. So it's a proportion question. Oops. There. Okay, so this is the type here is one sample proportion. Okay. And well, all we can really say is that, well, we know it's a proportion question mostly because there's no mention of a mean anywhere. There's no mention of a standard deviation, right? And so the absence of those things makes it not a means question, right? So you can also go the other way and say, okay, well, if I have a standard deviation, it's definitely a means question, right? Or if I have a mean, it's definitely a means question, right? And then, so a proportion, so the day after the game, a pollster contacts 420 randomly chosen adults and finds that 263 of them know that this company manufactures printers. So we're given this proportion, the sample proportion of 263 over 420, right? So it's just one sample proportion because we are given one proportion to compare, right? The problem with one sample problems, right? One sample means or one sample proportions is I have to give you the sample information and the number to compare it to, right? And so we want to compare it to the goal of the company is that over 60% of the public recognizes its brand name, blah, blah, blah. Right? So we want to compare to 60%. So again, you don't have to tell me why or anything. I just want to explain it to you so that you have it to fall back on. Good. Yeah, and I've actually given you the list of options, and I've included regression as an option in the, but that one should be pretty easy to pick out, right? So it's just a list, one sample mean, matched pairs, two sample means, one sample proportion, two sample proportions, or regression. And then you just circle the one that applies. Okay. How about this one? How are we feeling about 2? If you've had a peek already. Nice. So, by the same logic that we used earlier, right? Now we have standard deviations and means, so that narrows it down to, okay, we have a means question, right? So, and we know we're comparing 2 groups. First thing we can say is that, okay, well, we're comparing 2 independent groups, right? We've got the in-house and the consultants. Okay. So that makes it just 2 sample means, right? Because they're 2 different groups, but also the sample sizes are different. Yeah.
When we get the mark short says if we select the type, do we have to get an explanation as to why we picked that? Or
no, you just circle the right option, move on. Yeah. So one clue is that you can check the sample sizes, and if they're different, it has to be 2 sample means. Right? Matched pairs, you have 2 samples, right? But they're pairs all the way, right? And so they have to be the same. And also for matched pairs, I have to give you the mean of the differences and the standard deviation of the differences. Right? So the type here is 2 sample means. Since we are comparing 2 independent groups. Give you some time to read this one. Yeah. Just give it a minute. Read fast, everyone. Janice is ready. What are we thinking? Nice. 2 sample proportions. So again, right, just kind of looking at what's given to you. You don't have a mean, you don't have a standard deviation, so it has to be a proportions question, right? And we're comparing the proportion on the West Coast to the proportion on the East Coast, right? So now you've got 2 sample proportions that you want to compare, right? So comparing, I don't know how else to say it, comparing 2 sample proportions gets a little redundant. Oof, can I squeeze this into one? Oops. It got a little page breaky. So this isn't one of those where I get you to identify the type, right? But it's good to get the idea of it anyways. Right? And so we've done this survey, right, of 6,000 employees, and we asked them whether they preferred a 4-day work week, right, 4/10s instead of 5/8s. Okay. So this would be our favorite probability question, right? So type, it's a probability question, and it's what I question. Right, so we've looked at two-way tables before, right? I made you fill them in, right? Gave you some of the information, made you fill in the rest. Here, I'm just gonna give it to you and then ask you some probabilities. So what's the probability that an employee at this government agency prefers a 4-day work week, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Question 5. What are we thinking here? One sample mean? Nice. Why is that? One sample mean? Awesome. Yeah, so we've got just one sample information from one group, right? But the way the one samples work is we have to have the sample information and a number to compare it to, right? So don't be thrown off by that 2 millimeters, right? The strict 2 millimeters. So of course, if you're manufacturing catheters, you have to be pretty precise, right? And so that's why we have these itty bitty decimal places, right? So it's important that you don't round too quickly there. Okay? So one sample mean, right? Because we're comparing the mean of one sample to 2.00. Nice. Oh, and I want to ask you guys, is it called iced tea or iced tea? It's iced, right? I steal all these questions from textbooks, of course. Unless they're animal themed, then I make them up. But based off of animal facts, usually. But yeah, the textbook said they just called it iced tea. And I had to add the D because I just couldn't handle it. I was typing it out. I was like, no, and so I even asked Steve in my office. I was like, is it iced tea or is it iced tea? He's like, oh, iced tea. Yeah, so, okay, I'm glad we all agree. Yeah, okay. Then it's official. I'll take it. Yeah, because it's really weird that they would just call it iced tea. Yeah, as Steve pointed out, that would be just frozen tea. Oh. Oh, we've cracked the problem.
It's just
Okay, we've cracked the code. We're more Canadian than we all think. Oh, iced tea for sure. What type of problem is this? Probability. This would be a tree diagram one. All right, where you have to make a tree diagram and then figure out the probabilities at the end of each branch and then use those to answer the questions.
there you go.
Oh. Okay. What type are we thinking for this one? Question 7. Or
She said it's not.
So it's going to be matched pairs. Why? Because we're taking 2 measurements on the same subject. Right? Yes. No, just rip it up. So here, right, I give you the before and I give you the after information, right? But you only care about the mean of the difference and the standard deviation of the difference, right? Because even though we could go ahead and compare these as independent groups, right? We want to capture that change in before and after for each individual, right? And so when I give you the difference in the mean and the standard deviation and the sample size of the differences, right? You know you have matched pairs. Okay. So matched pairs. Since we are making 2 measurements, so here's the official explanation, making 2 measurements on the same individual, unofficially, because I've given you the mean of the difference and the standard deviation of the differences. Because I give you the mean and standard deviation of the differences. So that's kind of the unofficial reason. So here, I'm just giving you practice for the multiple choice, right? So this is a Z-score question. So it will be as multiple choice, right? But if you know how to do it for real, then you can do it by multiple choice, right? And so this is a Z-score question. It's from section, yeah, 3.1 and 4.1. Yeah. So it's when I tell you that something follows a normal distribution with a mean this and a standard deviation this, that's when we can just calculate our Z-scores and use the table to figure out our probabilities. What's the probability of this? What's the probability of that? Okay. So question 8 is just practice for the multiple choice. Same thing with 9 and 10 for that matter. Well, the question is, construct a 5-number summary. Great. And then, are there any outliers? Right, so just giving you practice for the multiple choice again. So the type here, I call it a 5-number summary question. And this is part of the chapter 1 multiple choice. Oh, I'll add that in here actually. So for the Z-score question section 3.1 and 4.1 multiple choice and chapter 1 multiple choice. Question 10. What do we think?
Would be one sample proportions.
And specifically, more specifically, it's a sample size calculation. Right? And so for the type here, this is a sample size calculation. Which is in the chapter 6 multiple choice. I'm just giving you practice. Yeah.
Can you show us how we found this sample size?
You got it. So, do you guys want to do it from scratch or just use the formula on the formula sheet? We can just use the formula on the formula sheet probably. Oh yeah. So this is the exact formula sheet that you'll have on the final, right? Hopefully just print it a little nicer, right? If you don't have a copy of the one-page formula sheet that I gave up, improved, I guess, condensed at least, right, you've got that sample size calculation in 6.1. So we're given on the formula sheet that n, remember n is your sample size, is z star over m squared times p star q star. Z star for a 95% confidence interval. I don't even know why I'm looking. I know it. 1.96. Just go through the motions, I guess. 1.96. And your estimate must be accurate within 3% of the population proportion. Okay? What that 3% is, that's your margin of error. Okay? So here, I'll just highlight here. So margin of error, oops. Equals 0.03, right, 3%. But we have to use a decimal.